Hey folks, this is Herb Houston. About 5 years ago, I installed a 200 4R transmission in my 70 Pontiac, and some of you guys may remember this. I had a transmission from Monster Transmission, and I was doing a 200 4R swap into that, took the Turbo 400 out of it. Well, needless to say, the transmission's out of the car. I've gotten some asks, I've gotten some questions about it, and saying how reliable is the transmission, how did it hold up. And this is a video that I'm going to start off on my rebuild process for the 200. Now, want to qualify a few things. First, I bought this transmission from Monster Transmission. They were saying that it should be good for about 350 horsepower, 375 foot-pound of torque. And my big Pontiac is probably pushing every bit of that, if not then some, probably closer to the 450 horsepower, 500 foot-pound torque range. And the 204R isn't exactly famous for being super strong from the factory, so a lot of people were asking the questions about it. So actually, I bought a book, the only build manual I could find online. It was from a company up in New York called CK Performance, and they actually have got a manual here which talks you through everything you got to do to beef up the 200 to take close to 1,000 horsepower with quality parts. And some people are famous for the 700 R4, and a lot of people don't like the 200, saying the 700 is stronger with the gear set and such. And I'm not a transmission guy by any means, folks. This is not me being a professional mechanic or anything like this. I'm just a lay person. I'm just a guy that likes to work on the stuff on the side. So it's a little ambitious, but after reading the book, I've got some pretty good confidence that I'm going to be able to rebuild this 200, and then at least I'll know what I've got. But some people were asking, you know, how good was the transmission from Monster, and I do want to just, you know, answer some of those questions based on some of the stuff that I found inside the transmission. So first, they represented the transmission for 350, you know, foot-pounds of torque, 375 horsepower, which was asking a little bit too much for my car. My car was definitely going to put that into abuse, so I was just concerned about getting the transmission set up and overdrive in there with a good platform, and then upgrading it from there, which is where I'm at. Second thing I want to say is the car drove in here. The transmission did not fall apart. It did not break down. It did not cause any issues or problems. It was, shortly after I started driving it though, it did seem to have very soft shifts, especially compared to my Turbo 400, and some of that was attributed to the higher stall converter that we had in there. We had a 10-inch 2800 stall converter in it. But I would think that if you were at 3,500 or 4,000 RPM shifting, that it should feel just as firm as it would with a low stall converter at lower RPM. So it was very soft shifts compared to my Turbo 400. I wanted to correct that. And so I started to dig into the transmission. I was going to switch it over to a full manual valve body. And to do that, I had to take a few things apart in the transmission. And when I started taking things apart, I just figured I should finally get it all the way to the point of pulling it out and checking it out front to back. So, you know, the folks at Monster Transmission, they represented it well. They gave it a billet servo. So it had the Superior billet servo setup, which has more surface area, about 14% more surface area than the Buick International servo. So a lot of applied power there on the secondary side of that. The pump system got an upgraded 10-vein pump, which is much better fluid flow and pressure consistency throughout the RPM range. And they did something that actually Chris talks about in the build manual. He talks about actually double feeding the direct clutch, which you do through actually taking a seal off the center support and filling in the return hole for one of these bolts that feeds back down into the valve body, and then opening up an exhaust port in the valve body separator plate. This was done, but the separator plate didn't look like it got modified. But that was actually applying better torque and better horsepower to the system. So that was a good job, as well as it was just an overall affordable package. I mean, transmission was like $1,200 when I first bought it. Now I think Monster offers an upgraded version of that. I got the biggest, baddest one that they had at the time, and now they make one that's a lot stronger. I think 450 horsepower, so they probably do a few other things to it. But those are just some of the things that I found. Unfortunately, I found some other stuff that was kind of interesting that kind of caught me off guard as I was setting up the transmission or getting ready to put the valve body in there. The 3/4 accumulator piston, which is up in the, actually in the bottom of the transmission, way up under where the valve body goes, that was totally not in the transmission. There was no 3/4 accumulator in there, which should have firmed up the 3/4 shift, but it felt very, very tame. The secondary 1/2 accumulator system had a double spring system in there, which was kind of odd. Maybe that was a superior upgrade. Don't know what was going on with that. There was no cushioning spring on the servo, which, if you look right here, here we've got the servo, and you've got a retract spring right here, and there's another spring that goes right inside here. It goes right on this section right here to help push the secondary side back out. That was not even there in the transmission. Now, the seal is taken off of that piston like it's supposed to for higher performance applications, so I don't know if that really matters or not. The pan, unfortunately, the pan was previously dented and it got beat back out, apparently, as I saw when I took the pan off. Probably the biggest concern that I had, which has really validated me tearing this thing down and going back through it, was the direct drum. So check this out. Here's the direct drum, and this actually engages, turn this around here, the input drum goes inside here like this. Sorry about this, guys, I'm trying to display that. And then coming in from behind, the what they call the sun shell, and that's a popular upgrade for this. That's another thing. They had a hardened sun shell, goes into the bottom of this like so. Okay, very similar to this. You can see it keys in here. Well, that hardened sun shell used to be the weak spot. You'd break off these tabs and such, and so that's hardened, so that's not going anywhere. But the problem is now, look at the direct drum. Direct drum. You see this? I don't know if you can tell. It's grooved right in there. See that groove? See how deep that is? Chris actually talks about in his build manual that you can have up to 20 thousandths wear right here, and you can clean it up. But anything more than that, you should dispose of it. And I've got like 1/8 of an inch. So I'm really glad I tore it down, because I don't know how long that thing was going to last. Now, truth be told, I don't know what condition this thing when it got put in. Maybe it was great. Maybe it's not. I don't know. The band, and the band goes around this drum like this and clamps. The servo pushes on the band and clamps it in and stops one of the planetary sets, I think, and then that's how it gets a gear. You can see the band hasn't even worn a lot of the writing off, so I wonder if the servo had the proper clearance to it, and if it was even clamping on the drum, or was it the sun shell slamming into it and eventually eroding that corner out. At any rate, that all has to get replaced. So the long and short of this, guys, that's what I found when I pulled the transmission apart. I am going to put it all back together, and I'll be recording other videos on the build process. And the goal here is to make a 200 4R transmission as strong as it possibly can be. It's probably going to have a lot of billet internal parts. We're going to be upgrading the pump to a billet pump. We're going to be going full manual valve body with a high pressure system, so it's going to be running over probably 270 psi plus all the time. So we're going to go with a billet pump rotor to hold up and everything, you know, throughout the course of driving. And at the end of the day, the idea is to have a full manual 200 4R 4-speed transmission that can be manually shifted through the gears like power shifting and manual, or granny shifted for street driving, and then have full lockup on it, so I can actually shift in a lockup situation from 2nd through 4th gear with lockup on the converter, which should be pretty impressive. So maybe that's pie in the sky stuff. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know. But if you want to come along for this ride and see how this whole thing goes together, you know, come and join me. All right. Talk to you later. Thanks for joining. Bye.